How did EBFT come to life?
Like many things in life, it started in a pub.
EBFT started over 10 years ago, and it sort of followed on from Keith and Lainey doing various charitable activities for other things, you know, that included the local hospice and cancer support and things like that, and a sense of social responsibility. I guess it was the driving force.
Well, there's a lady who I don't think she goes there anymore, but Lynn O'Reilly.
It must have been about 2012 when my story began with Keith. Keith had a friend called Gary, and they were having a drink together in the pub, and I happened to be in the pub as well, and that's where the story started.
So Elaine and I lived less than a mile from this pub, something that I'd known for since I was 16, really. And yeah, I don't know how the conversation began, but it was just a conversation of Lynn being the senior in a secondary school in Bradford.
Gary introduced me to Keith and said that Keith was very interested in developing a project. He wasn't quite sure what or how or when or where or who with, but he knew that he had in his heart a mission, if you like, and that mission was really to give back to young people in and around the Rochdale area. And so Gary introduced Keith to me and said, perhaps you'd be interested in hearing about this mission. And to be honest, I said to Keith at the beginning, actually Keith, I'm just retired and I've just done 40 years working with young people and I prefer to be doing something else with my retirement. However, we got chatting.
So, from what I've heard, you were very much involved in the beginning stages of EBFT.
Yeah.
So, can you tell me a little bit about how was that?
Of course, yeah. So, I knew Lynn sort of socially before knowing sort of Lainey and Keith, just through when I used to work in pubs and restaurants. So it was just, they'd sort of all come into the pub, into the restaurant and sort of start getting plans together. So I was, always sort of listening over and, just wanted to know a bit more about it, really. So I spoke to Mike Sagson, who actually, who's an employee here, and sort of asked him to get me a bit more information. And it was very much an email from Mike to Lainey. Bex wants to help out, she wants to be a volunteer. And then sort of emailed the day after, and yeah.
And we started sharing, he shared his vision of what he thought he wanted. And I added my experience to it, if you like, and said that although I'd worked for the last 16 years of my career outside of Rochdale, I still had contacts within Rochdale, within the education field, and that perhaps we could work together to get something off the ground.
How is Albany linked to EBFT?
So Albany is linked to EBFT in that we fund the charity directly from ourselves. It was established by the owner of the company, Keith.
And they're the seeds for what is now EBFT were born then, out of those discussions.
First of all, we had to plan out what our values and principles were about working with young people.
the core values are about offering support, encouragement, and
it entails moving children on to where they might want to be, but have no imagination of what that could be. So kids who can write, kids who can draw, kids who can sing, kids who can imagine they play instruments, etc. Just to find out what that is and to give them an opportunity to take that forward. It's also equally good to find opportunities for them, such as employment.
Young people who would benefit from these opportunities and not only have those enrichment activities and the chance to develop themselves as young people by exploring their own interests and developing new interests, but about looking to the future as well and creating a future that was beyond what had been previously their small realm, if you like. So basically we went on a venture then to seek partners to work with, and I had some contacts with high schools.
The next thing I know is that we're in front of a local secondary school headmistress with an idea of what we might be prepared to do for any of her kids in her school, which was local to our Albany's offices. And
And at that time, what were you prepared to do?
no idea.
Oh, great.
But that's where Elaine Baine came in, because she took over activities with children from the secondary school.
How were the early stages of EBFT?
I think for obviously the family was quite stressful because there was a lot of planning to go through. But for me, just sort of being a volunteer and a volunteer mentor, it was fun. It was, a great laugh. Loved sort of being there and, supporting the children. And I found it, just sort of very inspiring really for what we were trying to get out of the children, through the charity.
What were the main challenges with getting that started with all the authorities and schools?
Yeah, well, the local authority were just, as I was to start off with, mind-blowing and very supportive. And then the Charity Commission, if I remember rightly, was incredibly full of red tape, but actually was quite straightforward in the end. When we sort of distilled it all down.
It developed from there, and Lynn had said, Lynn became one of the first trustees of Albany Children's Trust, which was what it was originally called. That'd be about 15 or 16 years ago. And ACT was, of course, the acronym.
The plan, well, it was ad hoc to start off with, to be honest, Teresa, because we were feeling our way. And it was trying to find a balance between what the children had already experienced or where the gaps were, in our view, where the gaps were, where we might be able to develop interests, and also what was available. So we had visions of an allotment, gardening, we had visions of cooking, we had visions of giving children chances to simply have time to explore what they enjoyed most.
Put our own ideas down and, go from there. That's how we sort of built, that's what we really built the schedule around. But I mean, obviously, that was from when we were at the rugby club and then moving to Berry Road, which were the old Albany offices.
And as the years went by, I suppose, we developed it further by looking at how else could we improve the life chances of these young people.
Which were the partners, allies that helped you guys early on?
Oh wow, so obviously Rochdale Rugby Union Football Club, they were massive sort of help to us back then. I mean, that's where we sort of ran it from in the beginning. We had obviously Albany Products, you know, a lot of the funding, a lot of staff would, you know, pop in and out of sessions, say hi to the kids, which, you know, was brilliant. It was bringing sort of the charity and, you know, the business together. Littleborough Fire Station, they were fantastic. You know, they ran a lot of sessions that we attended. And I mean, they were brilliant with the children as well. I mean, there's just a lot of other, you know, local businesses like the Asia, and the kids would go there and just have a, you know, a proper sit-down meal with, you know, the group, and, you know, something that they'd not done before, which, you know, it was just an experience for them.
I got involved with the Elaine Baine Family Trust in the early stages, with Elaine talking through her philosophy of how she saw the trust developing and how she would take it forward. And she was looking at volunteers. So my role with the Albany Children's Trust, as it goes then, was to come in 2 days a week and work with children that were engaged with the Elaine Baine Family Trust.
Do you remember the first activities? How were they? Or where were they?
Yeah, so the very first place I went to with the children, that was actually at Rochdale Rugby Club. That's where we used to sort of run it from. And our first full day, sort of back all those years ago, it was the Eureka Children's sort of Museum that was in Halifax. And I think our second full visit, that was at the Museum of Science and Industry in Manchester. So that was going on trains. A lot of the children hadn't even, you know, sort of been on a train before. So it was just all the experiences that they got that, you know, they hadn't had.
We didn't have any facilities, basically. We didn't even have a room. So we camped in Albany's offices and cleared people off to other areas and moved in there. I remember the first Asian girl who wouldn't have a biscuit until everybody else had had a biscuit, because that was the routine at home. She was the eldest and she was the one that ate last. So that was an eye-opener. I remember personally going up to the rugby club, because that's where there was space, where we could take kids both inside and out. And outside, they just run in the fields, because there are about 10 acres of fields up there. And we maybe got a rugby ball and kicked it or passed it and ran around. And they basically hadn't had an opportunity to do anything like that. So I remember that. They enjoyed it.
And it all developed from there. So, you know, one group from Kingsway Park, and then another school, Cardinal Langley, that are still heavily involved with us now, came on board, and then another group was added. Activities ranged from artwork to Laney's passion of photography to day visits to different places, so that children who perhaps hadn't even been on a train or public transport before got to do things like that and visit, you know, museums and activity places.
One of the first activities with the first groups from Kingsway Park was literally going to Albany offices and just interviewing you guys.
Yes.
So I'm curious if any of the questions stuck to your mind, because kids can just come up with the most amazing things.
Not really. I just know that there was. That they wanted to. They had to find out who was from Australia, or who had a link to Australia.
Did they manage?
They managed. Yeah, they're good.
Did you feel like the schools were also a little bit, and the kids, a little bit mind blown with everything that
They were.
Yeah.
The school certainly was, because it was too good to be true. And I'm sure that the young people that you're working with now in their schools will think it's too good to be true.
And coming from it, from an education point of view, I saw the benefits of the trust and of being a trustee, working with somebody who just wanted to enrich the curriculum that the children had in school. So it wasn't a case of doing more maths, doing more English. It was doing things like the photography. It was getting to know the area that they lived in. And working with Elaine, and Elaine working with the children, enabled a lot of work to be done in introducing the town itself to the children. The enrichment programme that the Trust financed was absolutely fantastic.
And I know that those young people in the early cohorts that I had dealings with certainly benefited tremendously. And the vision was certainly fulfilled.
if you could choose just one word or expression that conveys who you are as a person, what that word or expression would be?
Determined, I think.
I'm an admirer.
Kind. Yeah, I think I'm a very kind person.
Look back at your life, and the reason that I'm very, very fortunate is that my parents did everything that they could, but most importantly, showing love and care to their 3 sons. And you finish up with an approach and an attitude to life that leaves you with an EBFT or 2 on your hands.